Sure. Hello, welcome back to Four Corners of the Page. This is episode 2 of what is going to be called Self-Pub Convos, where I interview new self-published and indie authors. It's been a real passion of mine over this past couple of months. I'm really glad to have started this project, and I'm really glad to have Marie Mullany with me, who must be a bit fed up with me because we just recorded for about 3 minutes before I had to stop her and we had to start again. Hi, Marie.
Hi, and
How
it's not a problem at all.
are you doing? You okay?
Yeah. So my name is Marie. I run a world building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and I've written a epic fantasy series called Sangwell Chronicles.
Yeah.
Um,
I was just saying
yeah,
before we started, and then before this first recording as well, that I really, really enjoyed your first book, and I also really enjoy your YouTube channel. I've become a real fan over the past week, and I think part of that we were talking about in the failed first recording is just how much of your stuff focuses on world building and how important world building is for successful RPGs, for successful tabletop RPGs, and for successful writing. And would you mind just introducing yourself one more time, and we can talk about that a bit?
sure. I grew up in South Africa, and I was in an all-girls school, and I didn't fit in very well into that environment. And I fell in love with fantasy, as one does quite often in when you're sort of at the fringes of society. And I decided I'd try writing a book in school, which I did. It was a terrible book. No one will ever see the light of day on that book. But it did, I did enjoy the world building around it. Then I discovered role-playing games. And role-playing games is where my passion then lay for the next 20 years. And I still, to this day, I run a game every week. And what I learned from role-playing is if your world has a solid foundation, any plot thread can be worked into it. Any anything can work as a plot.
Hmm.
But you need to know what your world is, and your world needs to be ready to tell the stories you want it to tell. And I guess that's most of what I try and communicate in both my videos and in, I guess, what I try to apply to the books as well.
Hmm. I think, first of all, do you have a copy of that first failed novel?
Somewhere, somewhere.
And the other thing,
Only a physical one. I doubt I have a digital one. So.
it's intriguing that you say that because I remember when I was 16, 17, I bought this big kind of A1 sheet of paper, maybe even A0 if that exists, and I spread it on the kitchen table as a teenager. And I tried my best to create some kind of Tolkien-esque, big, massive map of this fantasy world. And it totally fell flat. Basically what I was doing is I was just drawing little pictures on a piece of paper. And I find it really interesting kind of going through your videos and reading your work because it is so apparent that you do need a much more considered approach with certain types of fantasy story to be able to really immerse the reader. And shall we start with your YouTube channel first? Would that be okay?
Sure.
I've been really interested going through it, partly because there's so many things you pick up in your channel that are kind of minutia of empire and of history, things like that I would at 16, 17 never even have begun to consider that are really kind of critical aspects to have world building successfully drawn out.
I think I wouldn't have thought of many of those things at 16 either, right? But a lot of it as well comes from, I guess, my biggest problem with the way in which many people world build is that they tend to world build only at like the thoughts of, a single leader somehow being the empire or the
Hmm.
kingdom. And that just isn't realistic unless you're literally writing a Morgoth, you know,
Yes.
a a magical entity that can enforce its will,
Yes.
or a sorcerer that can enforce their will physically, right? If it's a normal person or a person in a conglomerate of magicians, medieval kings had to negotiate with their nobles all the time,
Yes.
right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is people don't think about where material objects come from. I did a whole
Yes.
video about spinning about this because of it. Because do you have, like, before we automated spinning, to spin enough threads to make a single pair of jeans would take one spinster a year
Mm.
just for the threads, nothing else. Not sewing it, not weaving it, not just the threads, right?
Yeah.
And and that's why like clothing is so expensive. That's why you don't get, curtains in hanging in peasant houses and stuff like that. That's why banners were a problem and so on. And so many authors kind of gloss over that.
Yes.
And I think the author that most brought home to me how important that stuff is Catherine Kerr. When I read her books, she writes in a sort of equivalent of kind of dark ages,
Mm.
right? So a very Celtic inspired setting. And her in some of the like peasant areas, she has peasants paying their lords taxes in like wheels of cheese, and like people get paid in like two shirts a year and things like that.
Yeah.
Like these things are expensive because it takes so much time to create them,
Yes.
you know. And yeah, and I guess that's been a passionate love of mine. It's like is that minutia, which I feel really authenticates the setting,
Yes.
you
I
know?
think the other thing that I mean, there's two other things when I was looking at your videos the other night that also impressed me. The one was belief systems in an empire or a fantasy world. Because often what you have in fantasy worlds is you have maybe one, maybe two religions if the author is feeling fancy.
Yeah.
And everyone is either can't be or can't be. And in reality, it's much more complex than that. I watched one of your videos last night about the role of atheism in fantasy videos, which I found really
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, like, religion is such a varied thing. If you think just the just the one faith of Christianity has got multiple sects in it. So does Islam. So does, Judaism. So does Shinto, Buddhism, Hinduism. They all have multiple different interpretations because it's such a personal identity,
Mm.
right? Even atheism, like I I call myself an atheist, right? I believe in nothing. But that's not actually what most atheists would describe themselves as. I don't believe there's anything, but I don't think you can prove it, and I think there is some spirituality. Like a
Mm.
lot of atheists describe themselves like that, and that's 100% fine. It's because it's a personal thing, and it bugs me. It bugs me when I walk into a setting and there's just nothing religious wise, like, especially if it's, I mean, I understand the need for simplification,
Yeah.
right? The thing is, you're writing a fantasy world. You're not just going to have global kind of, you're not going to have the plethora of religions that we have.
Yeah.
But different countries should should probably have like some different interpretations of faiths,
Yeah.
things like that. It's one of the things I really appreciate about Martin is he does
Yeah.
have a multitude of faiths,
The other
which makes
one.
sense to me.
Yeah, and the other one the other video I watched the other night was the role of geography in empire. That was the other one that I really kind of latched on. That you will go from the core of empire and what people believe there and how their attitude towards empire will be radically different from the outskirts and where maybe there is war to expand that empire. And also those things will be different over the course of time. You know, the height of the empire versus the
Yep.
birth of the empire versus the decline of the empire. All these different criteria will triangulate to create a different setting. Yeah.
Yes. But empire is a really fascinating construct because we've had so many in the history of our world, right? We've had Persian and Chinese and the South American empires and the Roman empires, British Empire. I mean, empire is a thing that seems to be something we all kind of inherently, most nations seem to strive towards. And it's such a fascinating thing to see how expansionistic empires are at the beginning when they're very cohesive as a society, and they bring in people, right?
Yes.
And bringing in people seems to just make them stronger. They can adopt anybody into them.
Yes.
And those people become part of the empire. And then when the older the empire gets, the harder it is for the empire to bring in new people,
Hmm.
despite the fact that maybe 200 years ago, they were all about the immigrants. And now they're like, no, no, everybody out.
Yes.
And it's very, very interesting if you study history with kind of a long enough lens to
Well,
see that kind of spread. Yeah.
what you're making me think of right now is I went to Mongolia in, oh, Jings, 2018.
Mm,
It's fascinating. We went to a couple of the museums that kind of talk about the Mongolian Empire and this thing that just kind of exp ballooned west, all the way into
mm.
I think, basically Ukraine or something like that. Um,
It was
yeah,
massive. The Mongolian Empire was humongous. I think
yeah,
that
and rapid
I,
too.
I speak under massive correction. Don't quote me on it, but I think they turned around just short of Venice. Um,
Wow.
like it was huge.
One thing I
Uh,
saw in the museum, there was a letter. Forgive me
mm,
for derailing immediately. There was a letter
mm.
from I think the Pope sent it to the current leader of the Mongolian Empire, and the paper said something like, "Yeah, we're sending a priest to you, and we strongly invite you to convert to Christianity, and we look forward to accepting you into the faith." And basically, then the letter response that was in the museum saying something like, "We're sending your priest back to you. We look forward to seeing you in Rome." Some really brilliant, witty response. But it's interesting, isn't it? And one thing that I do appreciate is in your channel, you often have these videos that begin with real historical events or battles, something from Japan or elsewhere, that then get tied into the world under discussion in your channel, be it your own or someone else's work. And it seems like you've got quite a wealth of historical knowledge, and I'm wondering where all that came from. I was,
So I read a lot. I've read a lot. Like I've read an enormous amount of historical, like just pure history.
hmm,
I have a deep love for historical exploration. I also like, with the advent of YouTube, I watch a lot of historical channels, and archaeology is especially a fascinating subject to me. I love ancient civilizations and that kind of thing. So I've just consumed an enormous amount of knowledge. And then when I make a video, I'll think, okay, what thread do I have in my mind that kind of ties to this? And then I'll go and research that.
hmm,
And I've got a couple of subscriptions to various academic sites to give me access to papers and things like that. Because unfortunately you can't, like, not all historical papers are free or available quite so easily and so on.
hmm.
So I do have a couple of those subscriptions, and then I go and research on those sites.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate the picking up all the historical knowledge. I remember when I again when I was a teenager, I thought, right, I'm going to read history, and I bought all these big thick texts, the American Revolution, 1,000 pages long, and I must have cracked open all of them and read about 15, 20 pages and put them down. I think YouTube has been a really big what's the word? Opportunity for someone like me who maybe struggles to get into maybe nonfiction so much to be able to begin to uncover some of the history. And I think YouTube is one of those, or maybe videos are one of these spaces where actually history breathes in these kind of spaces. It's so much better to get
Mm.
a sense of place and a sense of style. You kind of YouTube videos almost become like museums or something where we can actually discover these places a lot more keenly.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, there are some amazing channels for history on YouTube. The Kings and Generals channel is fantastic
Yes.
for,
Yeah.
like, I love them. Overly Sarcastic Productions, OSP, is also a great resource in that regard. Um, and I think, the reason why I've always loved history is because reading it has drawn me down the path of, but why? You know,
Mm,
yes, a war, Genghis Khan led the Mongol Empire, but why? Why were they ready to follow him?
mm,
Because yes, he was an impressive man, but they would have followed somebody else if it wasn't him, right? The 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 Mongol state at that point, the Mongol people at that point were ready for empire.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's the same with, with the Romans or anybody really. Like a state is either ready for that thing, that expansion, or it's not.
Yeah.
There are a very few exceptions to that. Alexander the Great might be one of the few exceptions to that. He might actually have been just that charismatic that he could, because he did lead a nation that wasn't necessarily ready for such an empire.
He got all the way to
Um,
India, didn't he? Something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
He got all the way to India,
Yeah.
which is why there are so many cities called Alexander or Alexandria,
Mm,
because he named every city after him. He basically just slapped his name everywhere he went.
Yeah.
Um, but he, and I mean, if you look at it, his empire also didn't last
Hmm.
because it wasn't at the Macedonian state wasn't at that state where it was fully ready for empire.
Yes.
So it conquered and he created a lot of successor states, but it couldn't survive his death.
Yeah.
Yeah. So generally speaking, it to me the interesting part of history is why were the Mongols ready? Why were the Romans successful and the Carthaginians weren't?
Yes.
What kind of the yeah.
It goes back
That's
to
that's the
all these factors in play kind of have to again triangulate to reach either
yeah.
a narrative or just a tipping point in history. Before we move on from kind of media and history, I don't know if you're familiar with the Assassin's Creed games. They've done something
I
really
am.
interesting.
I am. Yeah.
You know about their I don't know what you call it, the non-gamey version of Assassin's Creed. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Where
Yes. So do you mean the real world
no, yeah, where
assassins?
they take the game away. There's no quests
Yeah.
or missions or anything. You're just a
Yeah.
character walking through either recreated Greece or recreated Egypt, and it's an opportunity to kind of walk through these ancient civilizations and explore them with kind of narrative
Yeah.
voiceovers and things like that. I thought that was a really exciting opportunity that's going to, I think, balloon in the future as well.
That was a lot of fun. Like I enjoyed the Assassin's Creed games. I thought
Yeah,
they were a lot of fun to play and their world building is really good,
yeah,
and they draw very heavily on history in very good ways.
yes.
So
Especially the Ezio stuff. The that
yeah,
trilogy, I think, is very, very meticulously researched.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So going back to your YouTube and the fact that you take
Mm,
history and you kind of use that to analyze fantasy and encourage world building, which for you, outside of your own work, of course, are
mm.
really good examples of world building done immaculately and done right, done precisely. I don't quite know what the word would be there.
So to me, the most important part of the world building is it must serve the story,
Yes.
right? That is the most important part. So if you want to ask me who I think the best world builders are in that aspect, um, I don't know if you've ever read Guy Gavriel Kay.
Yes, Song for Our Bone.
Yes.
Wonderful. Read it last year.
Guy
Yeah.
Guy Gavriel Kay is hands down one of the best world builders in the business,
Yeah.
right? He draws on history very heavily, but his world serves his story very immaculately.
Yeah.
And very deeply. And then I love Catherine Kerr's work. I like George R. R. Martin's work very much. I think that he also builds very well. I love Tolkien's work. Tolkien, of course, has a somewhat different approach to his world building,
Hmm.
in that he approaches it from the linguistic angle, which is very interesting.
Hmm.
But I do very much love the Lord of the Rings, especially how people underestimate how fantastical Tolkien is, right? The world of Tolkien was flat before it was round. The reason why elves can see so far is because their eyes see the flat world. They don't have to deal with the curvature. They
Okay.
see as though the earth was flat.
Yeah, yeah.
They can literally see further. Um, and that is incredibly fantastical,
Yeah.
right?
Subjective.
It's
At least
like it's very
for
fantastic.
me with my terrible eyes, that means the world is basically a bowling ball, doesn't it? Um, one,
Yeah, but I mean, it's a very fantastical world. It's in its way, it's as fantastical as Pratchett's world
hmm,
of the Discworld. You know, so it yeah. To me, the important part is that your world building serves your story, and then the second most important part is that it must hang together internally,
yes,
right? I don't care if what you're doing is impossible in the real world. I mean, we don't have dragons, we don't have magic. Like,
yeah,
like I don't care how you structure it in your world versus our world, in that kind of reality. But it must be internally consistent,
yes,
right? So if you're running a straight normal implementation with no magic, say, of like a European inspired world, then you should probably have feudalism and strict gender roles, in a medieval type setting. Like,
Yeah.
if you're not going to have a reason why that changes, then you shouldn't change it, kind of thing. Is my yeah.
It's when the some of the more weaker worlds are a bit more of a hodgepodge. The kitchen
Yeah.
sink approach. Yeah, that's when things start to fall short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you can absolutely draw from multiple cultures, and I always encourage it, but you need to think about how they integrate,
Mm.
right? If you take like the Zulu culture and you mingle them with the Viking culture, like think about the different aspects of those cultures that come together
Yes.
and how they come together,
Yeah.
right? So that it forms a cohesive whole, because obviously those two cultures are massively far removed from each other.
Hmm.
So you need to think about what aspects come from their environment and how that would change if you bring them together on a different environment, and what aspects would evolve independently of that environment and that kind of thing.
I did
So,
some of my master's in intercultural communication, and it was all about this. The fact that so many
yeah.
people expect that if you just have a big smile on your face and I said this to I think Philip Chase in episode 1 as well, you just think you can walk in with a smile and hand gestures and that's enough. And that's such a misguided concept in the world today. I'm sure you'll be familiar with this yourself as well. I think there's a belief that you can blag it
Yeah.
if you're what's the word happy-go-lucky enough. And that sometimes does fall short because when you're interacting with cultures that have different perspectives, religions, worldviews, senses of humor, all that stuff, it's much more what's the word? Can be more fragile than that when we're encountering people
Yeah.
from different cultures, especially when there's a language barrier involved. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. The other video the last one that I'll pick up on, I was quite intrigued by because it's not just these big Tolkien Martin worlds that you mentioned. I saw one of your videos, you were talking about the role of vampires in the Dresden Files.
Yes.
This was really intriguing to me because if you're a Dresden File in the audience,
Yeah.
and I should say, I love the Dresden Files. I think it's fantastic, it's fun, but it's not something that I thought of as particularly, what's the word, deep or resonant. But listening to you unpick those vampire cultures, I thought was really intriguing.
So I think the Dresden Files are often under misjudged for
Mm.
what they are. Like I love the Dresden Files. And I'm up to date on all the books and so on. But the thing is, people misjudge the level of the world building because the world is set in our world,
Yeah.
right? Because it's an urban fantasy,
Mm.
and it looks as though what Jim Butcher did is he just took every possible mythology and jammed them all into the world, right?
Yes.
So you've got vampires, and you've got the multiple courts, and um, you've got the fairy creatures, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
But it is that kind of approach can very easily lead to a hodgepodge, disjointed feel. But if you look at the way that he uses those elements, they actively help his story and his world
Hmm.
every time, right? They support the story that he's trying to tell.
Hmm.
The white vampires being the guys who are conflicted and who potentially need to choose and so on, and the red vampires being more kind of the scaly hidden guys, and then the
Yes.
black vamp. Like the whole thing is very well done. I very much like there's an organization that his half brother Thomas is involved with. That I forget their name now, but they are actively effectively weaponizing atheism against the old ones, the old Eldritch horrors of
Yes.
like
Yes.
H.P. Lovecraft, right? By preventing people from believing in them.
Yes.
And I thought that was an equally fascinating concept, like weaponizing unbelief,
Hmm.
you know. And I thought that was a great concept, and it served very well in that context to the story.
Unbelief is weaponized against these Lovecraftian entities. Oh, I'm
Yes.
waiting for that next book. I read them all over basically
Yeah.
2 months back in I think
Yeah.
2022, and then I've been playing the waiting game along with everyone else. And yeah, I hope
Yeah.
that wherever he is, Jim Butcher is don't want to say hard at work, healthy and happy first of all, but after that, hard at work on book 18 whenever it comes. But if it's okay, we can maybe transfer to talking about your work. Because I
100%.
read The Hidden Blade, which is book one of
Mhm.
Sangwell Chronicles. Is it
Yes.
a completed trilogy, or is there more perhaps coming in the world?
So there are four books written in Sangwell Chronicles, which
Okay.
completes Chronicles. But the saga itself is probably three separate series with a couple of like standalone books. So I took the decision when I wrote The Hidden Blade firstly, I was like, okay, I have this idea for a saga, but I don't know if I have it in me to write it all. So I'll write The Hidden Blade as though it's going to be a standalone novel,
Yes.
right? Which is why it completes all its threads and then just has one single dangling thread
Yes.
that leads into the next one. Okay, so so it's like, okay, I'll do that. Then I was like, okay, I have it in me to finish the Chronicles. So I'll finish Chronicles and I'll leave just one thread. And then, so I've split the saga into multiple series, and each one tells its own story, has its own characters, and so on. And then it will conclude.
I
Um,
really love that. I mean, I've been reading Robin Hobb lately. She does a similar thing.
Mm.
Joe Abercrombie is doing a similar thing. I think
Yes.
sometimes readers get tired of these like 15, 16, 17 mammoths that they see on the shelf and find them inapproachable. Um, I,
Yeah.
on you go.
No, no, well that's exactly like Robin Hobb was my inspiration for that because her world works exactly like that, and I really like that.
Yeah, it's much
Um,
more approachable, and you can feel like you can read a trilogy and then step back and then come back into it.
mm.
Um, would you like to give the synopsis of The Hidden Blade, or is that something that maybe I should do? Maybe it should come from the author, shouldn't it? Would you describe The Hidden Blade for us, please?
So, The Hidden Blade is a story about an assassin who is commanded to assassinate someone that puts him in a really difficult situation
Hmm.
where he discovers that he has lines that he didn't know about previously, and he has to deal with that situation. Um, and it's basically the kickoff of a trilogy, well, a series about a family trying to protect the status quo in the
Hmm.
shape of the Bloodgate and the hungry entity behind it,
Hmm.
and a villain who is seeking to disrupt them all.
One of the things that when I made this channel a couple of months ago, I did not think was going to be a problem, which I have found to be a problem, is I want to like launch into spoilers and ask you about certain scenes and events. But because I'm trying to make these spoiler free, I didn't think about this as an issue when I made the channel, but it has become a real issue where I want to say, talk to me about this, 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 this. But I also want to keep it vague enough that people will actually read your book. Because I told you I was on vacation when I read the book, right? I had a week in India just
Yeah.
now. I was genuinely, I again read it on my phone, and I said this previously, my phone is not my favorite way to read, but I was sitting in the back of rickshaws and tuk-tuks just scrolling through because I really did enjoy it so much, and um, I like the writing style which I would put yourself into, where you don't feel the need to immediately give us everything on a plate from pages 1 to 10. Um, there's a my favorite series is Malazan. I think Malazan does something very similar with that first book where it takes place pretty much in one city. And because the setting is a little bit more restrained, it allows the reader to kind of more organically discover the characters and the themes and the world itself as they kind of read on with the story.
Yeah. I mean, I've read all the same books. So yeah, Malazan is one of my like favorite series as well. I really enjoy them. And what I took most from that series is that there are plenty of fantasy readers who don't need a prologue beforehand, who don't need to have a video game tutorial on how magic works. The
Yeah,
Lord knows I love Brandon Sanderson. I do. And I reference his work.
yeah.
But the whole prologue of Stormlight Archive, which is otherwise a great book, but the whole prologue basically reads like a tutorial on how to use
It's like a
magic.
video game, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Press A to
And
laugh. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um, so and you I feel like you don't need that. Maybe there's, I mean, Sanderson is massively more successful than I am, so who knows?
mm,
Maybe you do need video game tutorials for magic. But I do like I felt that there was a big enough readership out there who like figuring out the world as they go.
yeah,
As long as they're not left bad confused. As
yeah.
long as they're not left going like, no, I don't understand this at all, you
Mhm.
know, or it feels Deus Ex. I think so, and that's how I try to write.
Yeah.
Is It's that kind of. So I try to give the reader enough to understand what's going on in the scene and in the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't even realize this. This is my fault as a reader. I didn't know you put a glossary at the back of the book because I was reading it on my phone. But I felt like I didn't need it. At the same time, I was kind of inferring the different magic systems and things like that. I was organically picking up in the money system, and you referred to candles, for example, to reference time, things like that. I did feel came across without me needing to flick back and forth, which I think is a really lovely skill to have.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, I put the glossary in the back of the book, not per se because I thought that readers would need it, but because, people might put the book down for like a week or whatever and then want a refresher. And also,
yeah,
like, I put some extra information in there and some
yeah,
things that I thought people might find fun and so on. So,
yeah. So I guess this is a bit of a silly question. But you said that world building
mm,
should be designed to inform the plot, and the plot should be drawn out of the existing world building. So I'm kind of wondering
yes.
how the writing process and the creation of this world sort of came about for you.
Uh, okay, so let
That's
me
too broad a question.
no, no. So let me start with my. I am by nature somewhat of a cautious person.
Mm,
Right? So I'm cautiously risk taking. So when I started that's why the book was so self-contained, as I just described the whole series, right? But it was the same approach with the world building. So on a first off, is the reason why the Empire is Europe inspired and why Louis is a fairly standard, protagonist character is because if I sucked at writing, it wouldn't be like a some kind of tokenized character that, is doing weird stuff. It would just be a stock standard fantasy character that just isn't very good and quietly sinks away into nothingness. So, because of that, I wanted a world that was kind of standard-ish fantasy in some ways, which is why the empire isn't that unusual, right? It is a European-inspired empire. There's another continent which is African-inspired, which people come from in ducal air, and you start interacting with that part because I grew more confident, and I was like, okay, okay, I can actually like expand my horizons.
yeah.
But what I mean by when I talk about like the plot and the story coming together is I had this image of an assassin approaching a city, right? I had the kind of first him approaching the city and he's got this mission and the kind of like the events that he has to go through to unfold this mission. And I knew that I wanted him to wrestle with this question of when do the ends justify the means.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, now how do I make my world support that? Okay, I need a world that has assassins, a medieval world that has assassins. Okay, so you start building that. Then you're like, okay, now how do I build in magic? Because I've got to build in some kind of like fantastical elements, etc., etc. How do I build a magic system that supports my assassin character? How do you limit it? How do so you kind of structure it, but you keep in mind what your story is all the time.
Yes.
So you don't build something that's going to derail the story.
Yes.
And then sometimes you build extra things like the candle clocks. I just didn't want to use clocks. I
Mhm.
just didn't want to, have standard kind of tick-tock clocks. So I thought it might be fun to have a candle clock, and that then spawned a whole series of like sayings and idioms and so on that was just fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And it gives it that extra touch of originality, doesn't it? If you can do
Yeah.
something similar but dissimilar from our own world. I think there's lots of little hints of that in Sangwheel, which I really liked. But I'm surprised you said that you think Louis is quite a standard character. And I think what you probably meant by that was the archetype of the assassin coming into the city. But he was one of the
Yes.
things I really, really, really enjoyed about the novel, this idea that I'll try and avoid spoilers. The first scene we encounter of this character, and it's the first scene, so it's not a huge spoiler. He buys a present for his daughter, but he has to be careful to put his hand in the right pocket when he's buying the present because the other pocket, has a pair of eyeballs in it that he's going to deposit on a dodgy merchant's shelf. Right? That's the beginning, isn't it?
Yep.
And
That is the thing.
you go into this story, and it kind of hangs on the fact that this guy is loyal to his cause and um, feels accountable to his master, which I won't get into. but at the same time is deeply wrestling and sometimes does really nasty things. And the question of where that line is, it was one of the things I really enjoyed about the novel.
So that first scene actually comes from my love of James Bond. Yeah. So
Yeah.
James Bond always opens with the end of the last mission.
Yes.
Okay. So that was exactly what I did. I opened with the end of the last mission to introduce the character and then let that lead into the present mission. But yeah, he was a kind of a assassin inspired character in the spy James Bond kind of setting. And what I mean by standard is, I mean, he's an unusual character in some ways, but he's not like a out there cat. You know, he's not like weirdly different. You know,
Yes.
and a male character who's straight, who's there's no unusualness to him in those terms. You know, he's a kind of like stock standard guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I I really liked that theme of, and it's not, it's a theme you see elsewhere. The to what extent are you loyal to a cause that is a worthwhile cause? But I like that, and I also enjoyed the theme of, oh, I don't know what you'd call it, kind of identity naming that kind of pervades the
Mm.
novel. That people have all these different names, and that's also tied into the magic system a little bit. I don't know if you might want to maybe talk about the
Yes.
magic system a little bit.
Yeah, so the magic system is basically born around the concept of balance,
Yes.
right? And what you're seeing in the first book especially is how you have to use life to generate magic,
Hmm.
right? There's another way that you can use magic, but that's different and comes in later. But the easiest way to generate magic is just to use life energy,
Hmm.
which I call Elamar, which is just finish for life. Like
Oh, I didn't know that.
that's what
Okay.
it means. um, and that's why it has all the dots on it. They're not actually
I just thought it was a Tolkien
heavy
thing, putting
metal
two dots
dots.
at the
They're
top.
real dots.
Yeah.
They're dots that matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's life energy that fuels magic, and there's basically two styles of magic. There's an external magic, which is what Louis uses, the shadow magic, which he also uses in that first scene,
Yeah.
which is he can travel through shadows and so on.
Mhm.
And then there's an internal facing magic, which is where he can strengthen his body, he can make his perception sharper, he can heal himself, things like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
But for me, it goes a bit. It's not just that he can change his face. He seems to. Oh, so the assassin Louis can change his face, but it's not just that he turns into a blacksmith or turns into a gardener. He almost
Yeah.
seems to change his character and his name and his personality based on the person he is embodying. He almost becomes someone else, which I thought was a really interesting twist on that.
He does. So that is exactly what he does in the Hidden Blade. Is he um, and in obviously the subsequent novels is he uses this mechanic of like putting on a hat, but that is a psychological mechanic as well as a magical one. The magical one is him changing his face. The psychological one is he has built up these personalities in his mind and he carries them around with him as hats, and then he puts a hat on and he becomes the merchant or the bard or the mercenary, and he plays that role and he thinks of himself with that name, which is why in the narrating prose I change his name.
Yes.
So, and that's why there's only like I will reuse other letters, but Louis is the only one who ever has an L name. So that so the reader knows, like if you're reading a male name that starts with an L, it's Louis.
But I, I'm trying to think. It kind of comes back to that theme for me of maybe I'm reading a bit too deeply, but it comes back to that idea of trying to work out your own loyalty and accountability. It almost felt to me sometimes this character is literally escaping that accountability by putting on a different hat, which yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that you're not reading too deeply in because that is very much part of his theme, but that is his whole growth arc through the series.
Okay. Ah,
Is that is around those concepts.
I really, to people watching, I really do think it's worth finding this book. There's paperback and Kindle copies both, I think, right?
There's paperback and Kindle. There's even hardbacks. Yeah, and they're available on Amazon or all over the place and so on.
The worst thing for me about living in Kuwait right now is that I much prefer paperback, hardback than the Kindle. And it's been breaking my heart reading all these wonderful books and doing it not justice, I would say, by having it, digitally. Because for book two, I will be picking up the paperback or the hardback because I think it's the way to go, at least for me personally. Maybe I'm a Luddite.
No, no, no. I do like a paperback book. Although I will say that I read a lot on my Kindle, well on my phone, um, just because it's convenient to have your whole library in your pocket.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, but yeah, I do like a paper book. Generally a paperback rather than a hardback.
Mhm.
Just because hardbacks tend to have weight to them.
You know what it is? I find that I can attach a memory to a book that I buy and that I read. Say I don't know, maybe it's the week of my wedding so many years ago. I remember what I was reading that week, which was 11/22/63 by Stephen King, because I was in an Airbnb. My wife's American, we got married in the States, and I was in this Airbnb just in the evening when I had some downtime reading this novel. And so that paperback book hasn't just become a paperback book for me, it's become almost an emblem or a symbol of that time in my life.
Yeah.
Complete deviation.
Yeah.
I think that's always why I'll come down on the side of the physical copy.
Well, as I say, I do like a physical copy, and I think that people should, if they do like them and have the space to store them, should absolutely go for the paperback books. But yeah, it is available and it's available in wide release. So I just want to say this as well. You can buy the DRM free copy of the books on Smashwords, so you can download the EPUB, and it is not, because Amazon have now done this ridiculous thing where they're like, no, no, you don't own your own
You own
digital
your
content,
stuff.
which,
Yeah.
yeah, like that annoys me.
Complete.
It annoys me very
Wow.
much. Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the originally self-published and then published somewhere else, the second round of printing. Would that be right? Can you?
No, no, no. So everything is self-published. So it's actually self-published because of the hat thing. Like I had an agent turn me down with like a message that said, "You will never get published as a first-time author because you're changing your main character's name." And I was like, I guess I'm going to self-publish because that wasn't the mechanic that I was willing to give up.
That's really
You know?
strange.
Yeah.
Wayne has different hats. We go back to Brandon Sanderson, Wax and Wayne. Wayne has some hats going on. Um,
Yeah, but
yeah,
apparently, you can't like Brandon Sanderson doing it is fine.
I guess
A
he was.
first-time author changing the main character's name apparently is not fine. So, um, but yeah, so no, it's always been self-published.
Yeah.
But what happened was the first edition of The Hidden Blade, Amazon accused me of piracy of my own book. Like, or something like I don't entirely follow. No, no, no. The book was pirated. The book was pirated, and I was at that time exclusive with Amazon. So they delisted the book, and they were like, sending me threatening letters and stuff like that. And I'm like, my guys, the book was pirated.
So someone
Like,
copied and pasted it onto a different website to sell.
yeah,
Jeez.
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Like somebody made the book available in one of those pirate libraries,
gotcha.
and Amazon held me responsible. So, whatever. I
That's
eventually
a
got
corporation.
that unbanned, but
Yeah.
I decided to take the opportunity because by then I'd grown quite a lot as a writer.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, I'm going to release this thing wide. I'm not going to be tied into the Amazon ecosphere anymore.
Mhm.
But I'm going to take the opportunity to make some massive edits to this. Not Nothing in the story really changed. But a lot of the writing did. A lot of the scenes became tighter, and
Mhm.
so on. Just because I'd gained experience, and so I released the second edition. And with that second edition, I then published it wide. Yeah.
Did you,
So that's what happened.
am I right in saying you did the audiobook as well yourself?
Yes. So I've done all four audiobooks myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
How was
And
that?
yeah. So I mean, it's It's a really good exercise in final editing because you will be amazed the amounts of typos you catch when you're reading it aloud. Like, because you read over so many typos, when you're just reading, when you're just even if you're copy editing. And then when you're doing the audiobook, because you have to read every word, at times you're like, oh no, wait, that's not the right word. That's rains instead of rains, whatever stuff like that. Like so it's really good for that. And in general, like I quite enjoy doing the audio recording.
Hmm.
The mastering of an audiobook is painful, but I have now started outsourcing the mastering to
Forgive my
a sound
ignorance.
engineer.
Mastering and
Okay.
making the audio levels?
Yeah. So mastering uh, is the reducing the breath, reducing the background sounds, getting the loudness, the luft values of the sounds correct, and things like that. So there's nothing weird in the background, stuff like that. And kind of just enriching the voice a little bit, like adding, reducing some of the high level tones and upping some of the bass levels and things like that.
Hmm. How long did that take,
So
that whole
that's
recording
mastering.
process?
So, so The Hidden Blade is not that long a book. I think it's about a 10-hour audiobook. So
Hmm.
it takes about 15 hours to record a 10-hour book, to record it.
Hmm.
Mastering it, on the other hand, takes also about 15 hours, but now you have to listen. And
Yes.
you've got to listen with exactness. And you've got to listen to the exact thing that you've just finished recording.
Hmm.
So, so that's why I've started outsourcing that because, yeah, it's
One thing
it's a thing.
One thing YouTube has been doing for me is it's going to be knocking my edges off a little bit because one of the things
Yeah.
that made me fearful to start a YouTube channel was having to watch myself back, edit myself, listen to the sound of my own voice. I don't know why I'm asking other people to listen to me because I'm so fearful of listening to the sound of my own voice. But there is that thing, isn't it? Almost a self-conscious thing or a self-criticality
Yeah.
that comes into that. And with writing as well, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like at the beginning with YouTube, with the writing, with everything, I was like, oh, I sound terrible. Now I sound like how I sound. I've been editing myself for 3 years. At this point, I'm so used to the sound of my own voice. It just I no longer even really notice
Yeah. You have a
what I
second,
sound
you have a
like.
second YouTube channel as well, a little baby one that just started. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's just a little history channel with like a little animated character because it's easier. So the reason why I have the little animated character there, little animated avatar, is because it's easier to edit sound than it is to edit a full video.
Hmm.
You know, and the video editing software that I use has got like inbuilt B-roll stuff. Your kind of like stock videos.
Yes.
So I can just slap a lot of that as well as kind of like the whiteboard software in the background and generate the videos quite easily.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's a whole new realm, YouTube, that I'm enjoying it immensely, but I'm totally unfamiliar with it all. And
yeah.
just hearing the idea of recording a 15-hour audiobook and I think my first few videos I did about 25 takes, getting increasingly red-faced with each one. Um, yeah, it's interesting to hear that kind of transfer to other kind of similar skills.
Oh, absolutely. These days, I actually just script my videos, and then I've got like a tablet that I use exclusively for the scripts because you can just have the script scroll themselves,
Yeah.
and then you just have like a magic arm that holds the tablet right next to the camera. So.
Have you made any videos about kind of world building in terms of video games? I know we touched on Assassin's Creed, and I know that we haven't touched upon tabletop RPGs and things like that. But I know that you've gone into books a lot, but I'm wondering if there's any world building in terms of video games that strikes you as particularly strong.
So, in terms of video games, the world building and the video game that I like best is Ghost of Tsushima.
Ghost of
Um,
Tsushima.
I,
Oh,
yeah,
Tsushima.
Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
a PlayStation exclusive,
Yes.
but it is so good.
Mhm.
It's drawn from Japanese history, from Mongolia at the time when Mongolia started taking over parts of Japan as well, and it is so good.
Yeah.
It draws so well on like Japanese history and culture, everything about that time period. With both role playing and with video games, the difference between world building for that and world building for a story
Mhm.
is that a story is very much world building serves plot,
Mm.
right? You you are pouring your energy into the characters because the reader is going to connect to the characters and the reader must connect to the characters.
Yes.
The difference when you're world building for RPGs or world building for a video game is the player is going to come with their character.
Hmm.
The player is going to come with their actions. They are going to bring that love to the game. Your world needs to supply the adventure.
Hmm.
So you need to have more hooks, more story hooks in your RPG world than you do in a world that you're writing a story in.
Yeah.
Because a world that you're writing a story in, you don't need extra hooks. You're not going to write extra stories,
Yes.
you know. But a world that you're doing RPGs in, you need things for your players to attach to.
Yeah. And it's so hard, I think, often keeping the world consistent as you allow that player character autonomy. So as you're talking, two different examples come into my mind. I'm thinking of The Witcher 3, which I think is quite good at this, where Geralt is basically Geralt no matter what you do, because
Mm.
all the choices that you can make in that game feel, even if the path stray, they feel organic to who that character is. But then I was also thinking of like the game series like Grand Theft Auto 4. I don't know if you've played it. You've got Nico Bellic coming to New York saying, I'm going to be a new man for myself. I'm going to, you know, you know, lift myself up by my bootstraps and become a great man. Within 5 minutes, he's like gunning down civilians. And you're like, these two things don't match up whatsoever. And I often think this is the challenge with video games is to give that player, especially RPGs, to
Mm.
make the character feel like an organic, real human being that you can potentially even cry over in some very extreme
Mm.
cases. Like Rockstar are quite good at this with Red Dead Redemption 2. Um, but also make them feel like they have that agency. It's a really hard balance, I think, to have in video games. It's a unique challenge as well to video games, isn't it?
It is because you're trying to, on the one hand, you're trying to tell a story. On the other hand, you're trying to give the player the illusion that they are driving the story. They are the protagonist,
Yes.
but yet they are restricted
Yeah.
inherently because you have to restrict it to some kind of plot line,
Yeah.
right? So the illusion lies in making every choice feel natural.
Hmm.
And I think that this is something that I wish more authors would play video games and understand that principle.
Yes.
Because too often, a, a character in a book or a story will make a decision that seems to come out of nowhere.
Hmm.
That's just like the decision is made because plot needs it. Why are you doing this?
We need to
Because
move on.
plot.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Why wouldn't you tell him about this thing that's just happened? Well, because I need the drama of him not
Yes.
knowing. Okay,
Yeah.
but that's not a reason not to tell him.
I love Robin Hobb to death. I really do. I'm really enjoying
Yeah.
Elderling so much, but that is perhaps my one criticism of her is that characters can often be a bit standoffish with each other for plot reasons. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Like I adore Robin Hobb, but sometimes I'm like, seriously, you could just open your mouth.
Yeah, yeah. Talk to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other video games that are kind of emblematic of that really good freedom versus character. I mean, the other one that's coming up in my mind is the Dark Souls series, but that character never has a voice. But the world building is immaculate there, but the protagonist isn't necessarily voiceless.
Yes, but Dark Souls is glorious.
Oh, I,
Dark Souls and Elden Ring is both glorious.
I could talk about those all day. I basically
Yeah.
I always go back to playing those games. I start new games of other series and then I just come back and play Dark Souls again, especially with audiobooks. I'm a real big audiobook plus Souls guy.
Mm.
I'm listening to Dungeon Crawler Carl 7 right now while playing Elden Ring on my Steam Deck, and it's a fabulous time. It's too
Yeah.
fabulous. I'm wasting many hours, but yeah, the world building and going back to our earlier conversation as well, the world building in the From Software games is so spectacular because so much of it is subtext and inference as well.
Yes.
You can play with
Um,
and not think of what's going on at all. You have to dig in for it.
yeah. And I think that's one of the key things that makes those games so great is that you can just play through them, sure. But if you actually play them, if you go and explore the lore, there's this deep, rich world just below the surface.
Yeah.
That you just have to scratch to find it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Like I love those two. I also particularly like the Horizon Zero Dawn,
Mm.
and Horizon Zero Dawn Into the Forbidden West. Like I like both of those very much. I enjoyed how they put together the. I enjoyed how it was a post-apocalyptic world that isn't ugly. It's it's
Yes. It's
it's
vibrant, isn't it?
grown beyond the point. Yeah, it's vibrant and colorful and so it's no longer like, a dystopian, fallen apart, burnt
Like,
out husk of
yeah.
things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually I'm thinking about Fallout now and those games. I think those games are probably the ones that I would say are on the line. Fallout 3, New
Mm,
Vegas, and 4. Maybe with the exception of New Vegas. Again, that
mm.
giving that character, and basically what you have to do, I think, if you're giving your character too much, I'm just thinking about it right now. If you're going to give your character a lot of choice in a video game, does that necessarily mean that the world has to become more farcical? Because the reason that, for example, Fallout New Vegas works so well is because you have so much freedom and you can do whatever you like, but it becomes quite jokey by extent because nothing is taken that seriously. I don't know.
Well,
Does that make
Fallout by
sense?
its nature kind of doesn't take
Yeah.
itself that seriously, from the start. I mean, Fallout is kind of like Warhammer 40K, like I love Warhammer 40K, but it's a ridiculous world.
Yes.
It's like, and that's the point. It's not a world that's meant to be taken seriously. It's a world that's meant to be taken tongue in cheek,
Yes.
you know. And Fallout to me is the same.
You know
And
that
and
the video game
yeah.
that I spent most of my I don't want to say teenage years, maybe 12 through 15 on was RuneScape. I devoured that.
Mm,
I spent way too many hours into RuneScape and old school RuneScape, like just fishing at a pond, and it was very, very nice and beautiful. But that game
yeah.
was really kind of interesting. Um, would you call it world building? Because basically what they have to do is they have to every now and again kind of just slap on a little extra piece of land to kind of keep the servers going. And there's maybe another discussion there with video games that in order to keep, especially an online game going, you have to add new content and trying to seamlessly fit a new piece of content into that pre-existing world without it just feeling like, tacked on can be a big challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing that is often a challenge is they they start creating content that is A, boring, and B, is so clearly just a money grab.
Yes.
And you can see this most often in like the mobile games with the microtransactions, that aren't, in my opinion, that micro, but
Yeah.
all of the money that people sink into things like uh, what are the big games, Counter-Strike and stuff like that, like the
Gun
mobile
skins,
games.
things like that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just heinously expensive. And it's just like they keep adding new content to it, but really it's just content to create money,
Yes.
you know.
I have a
And
confession.
mm,
I've never admitted this before to anyone. I was one of the people back in 2006 who purchased Oblivion's horse armor. I don't know if you're familiar, and got my horse a shiny piece of what would you call it, plate all the way down the side, and that DLC is often heralded as the beginning of the microtransaction epidemic that we now are all facing. So if you think back hard enough, it's really all my fault.
well, again, it's not one pebble that's the problem.
Listen,
There's a great line from Babylon 5 that Ambassador Kosh says that he's like, when the avalanche has started, it's too late for the pebbles to vote. And I
right.
kind of I kind of feel like the microtransactions are at that point,
Yeah.
like
I think maybe I'm being too optimistic. I think I was going to say maybe the backlash is getting strong enough that perhaps with the more sizable DLCs are becoming popular again, like Shadow of the Erdtree. But maybe that's very hopeful because for every Shadow of the Erdtree, there's about 50 more frivolous, small little microtransactions. So maybe I'm being too hopeful.
yeah, what I'm hoping is that there's enough of a backlash against Amazon's decision to take digital content and say, well, you literally don't own it.
Yes.
And for people to start investing in physical media again. Because I feel like I'm a fan of digital. Don't get me wrong. I love being able to just download the games and so on and so forth. But I feel like we are running the risk of just being at the mercy of cloud providers.
Yes.
And we do need to still like have physical media around. Yeah. Like, um, yeah. So I hope that people do start investing more in like bigger pieces of physical media, like DVD box sets and things like that. Like I love my Lord of the Rings box set,
Yeah.
my Babylon 5 box set, things like that. Like um and I would hate for there never to be box sets again.
I think we're going that
And
way.
there won't.
Yeah.
Well, yes, that's the problem because people don't buy box sets. So I'm hoping that people will begin again to buy box sets, and that those purchases will make the physical media more viable to produce.
One of my favorite possessions as a kind of a, again, 11, 12-year-old, I had Doctor Who season one of the new series, and the DVD case was a TARDIS. And it was, just,
Nice.
oh, it was wonderful. I don't know if box sets are coming back, but I certainly hope that paper books are coming back to that discussion. Never go.
Mm.
Because there's something as well about having a nice bookshelf. Whenever I go to a friend's house and they allow me, I'll just stare at their bookshelf for 5 or 10 minutes. Um, and yeah, I do think you lose that kind of memory quality. I know our time is running short. One thing I wanted to do before we kind of finish up here is I understand you have another book. Is that right? Another book series aside from Sangwheel. Am I making that up?
Yeah, so okay, so I've got a couple actually. I've got a science fiction series that I'm writing with a friend of mine that's called Magic Fall, which you can find out on my website about, which is more a young adult focused sci-fi series. It's a lot of fun. Um, and then I have, if you're interested in spicy novels, in pure spice, I wrote it as an exercise to see if I could write explicit scenes. So that is what those novellas are. So buyer beware. But if you're interested in those kinds of books, they are available under my pen name, Talia Tethers. Yeah, and then I have Sangwell itself. I've also written an urban fantasy. I don't know when that'll be published exactly. I'm still deciding about that. But
Okay.
yeah,
But
which is Dresden
there's a
Files.
variety of stuff to choose from, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen,
Yeah.
our time is short, but I wanted to say, listen, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it, and I really did really enjoy The Hidden Blade. I'm going to get books 2 and 3. Again, I think physical copies are the way to go. But yeah, absolutely. And it was just a joy speaking to you as well.
It was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, thank you.
Good
All
luck with
the
the
best.
channel.
Thank you. And if anyone else
Thanks.
is interested in, maybe you're a self-published author yourself, an indie author, and you're looking to maybe just have that conversation about your work, I would be delighted. Please just reach out. There's an email address attached to my channel. And until then, I'll see you in the next one. So all the best. I'll see you next time. Peace. Bye.
Bye.